So the Fever event is finally live, and I just figured I want to start off my summon session by showcasing the net 5s I kind of really want to have. And that kind of goes hand in hand with the units that I personally think are the best for beginners, mainly because if you look at those two fire units, they're going to heavily carry you in Tower of Ascension, as well as things like guild content, and are going to be amazing for defense. Like especially Nora is going to be one of those units that you can put one of your best violence sets on and still like have utility outside of PvP. Then I went for Samate, which has a 33% speed lead, and that's going to make your team incredibly fast and is one of the best AO monsters to have early on. And then we got Adriana, which is a side grade to Fran for like extreme beginners, but she's going to transition extremely well into almost every cleave comp, and since the main dungeon you're going to be farming is going to be giants, I think she is definitely one to go for. And last but not least, the wind units, we have Jemire, who has HP based damage, and like I said, that's extremely good in PvE, and he has a full cooldown reset for your entire team comp. So he's extremely good with higher cooldown units, which most of the free-to-play units like Verd, Fran, Lauren, things like that really aren't. But once you do start getting more and more net 5s, I would say he's one of the cornerstones of most team comps. And then again we have Champan. He is a unit with a strip, and he has full attack bar control, which again he's going to unlock a lot of arena offenses. He's going to be amazing in Siege and obviously also in TUA. Okay, so here we go. We got the Trend Scroll on my beginner account. Wish me luck. I really want to get like a Samate or something. Oh, Juno. That's pretty good. It's pretty good. It's going to be mostly for RTA, but I'm really looking forward to playing with this account. I would have never ever imagined in my life that after 2.5 days of playing on a beginner account, I would have 5 net 5s on it, but I mean, here we are. One of it definitely was a Trend Scroll, and then the rest of them was pretty much just random mysticals that I picked up along the way. Plus we have like the extra mystical event where you get like an extra one after summoning 10. So I mean, that's pretty much where we're at right now. The thing is, like, none of them actually do anything for progression, so I feel like we're just better off keeping them in storage. We're also gonna stockpile on Devilmon obviously and like slowly get our way into it. I think the Poseidon is probably gonna be my first pickup, but I'm kind of debating between him and John, so it really depends what our next challenge is. I think Poseidon obviously is gonna be slightly better for TUA, but really not too much. And then John is obviously like way more enjoyable for like things like RTA. But besides that, progressing right now is kind of odd. Like, I just want you guys to check this out. I have an absurd amount of fight runes that are all just plus 15 and just like completely random. The game right now is giving away a lot of free runes. The thing is, like, despite us having these maxed runes, it's still kind of hard to like get into the super endgame dungeons, so I'm kind of just like whittling around somewhere in the middle field right now. So to catch you guys up to speed, pretty much I've continued on the Summoner's Way. It's fairly straightforward. It kind of teaches you about TUA, it teaches you about various other dungeons down here in the challenge section. It's all pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go too much into detail. What I also really like is that, first of all, the first thing is always going to be just going onto strategy information, and you don't actually have to search for it. You just kind of like go on the go button here, and the game even goes there for you pretty much. And as you guys can see, we got the quest completed. Now most of those monsters that you're getting here are actually kind of essential when it comes to clearing these dungeons. Now that I think about it, like the penguin is probably one of the only units that the game like recommends to you that I would not recommend picking up for one of these dungeons. But especially also like here in the Steel Fortress, you want to have buff block. And this guy is kind of like a brain dead version for that. So I can definitely recommend doing that. I think in general, like the best advice that I can give you guys is trying out every dungeon at least to a certain point, which is roughly like B7, maybe even B10. Again, like if you progress and watch this guide 6 months down the road, you don't have the luxury of just getting like a Vertihal, a Lauren. I think the Fran I got myself, the Crow and also the Veramos just max skilled and actually kind of just like ruined up and ready to go. So obviously progression is going to be like slightly slower, and maybe this is the reason why it feels so jarring to me right now. But to give you guys like a rough benchmark of what you should be aiming for, first of all would be Second Awakenings, which is kind of like one of the first power boosts, especially since you are getting a bunch of units for free in the game that are potentially Second Awaken material. I'm going to discuss all of them, and I'm going to tell you guys when I would recommend building them. I think the first one is definitely going to be Crow. I think Maybe if you don't want to build him first, he should definitely be amongst your top 3. The main reason for that is because he does do damage based on debuffs, and then also he has a team up. It's like just a very consistent damage dealer, and since he's Dark Elemental, you can pretty much bring him in every PvE dungeon out there. Now the second unit that I'm going for right now is my Raok. And as you guys can see, I'm pretty much almost there. Now those two are going to carry me fairly far when it comes to doing Spiritual Realm, which gets me fight runes, and then also the artifact dungeons. I think I'm going to probably use both of them in that. Now third, it kind of gets a little bit more tricky. I think Burnout is kind of a brain dead option. Now that means that if you don't know how to rune stuff, if you like kind of feel iffy and you kind of want to take it slow when it comes to doing things like giants, I think Burnout is still a very valid option. Another unit that I would highly recommend going for is going to be the Wind Naomi. She just kind of eats through bosses and there's really nothing I can add to that. The only issue with her is that like you can't pack too many damage dealers into your team comp. And down the road you're gonna have to substitute her eventually, which is kind of the reason why this time around I choose to not farm giants as my first dungeon, but focus on Spiritual Realm, where I pretty much have all the tools at my disposal already as it is, and I am setting up on a way broader spectrum. Even though it's not the best for PvP, since you don't get Swift Runes for instance, and that's definitely going to be like something that I'll be struggling with maybe for the first week or so. Now the second thing that I've touched on briefly, and that's going to be what I'll be focusing on tonight as well, is going to be getting into artifact dungeons. The main reason for that is because it does give you a nice amount of like extra base stats, so it's like an extra 3000 HP for instance, and then just a little bit of better substats. As far as I'm concerned, you should get away with just farming it for like a day. You don't actually have to farm like a very high level artifact dungeon. I think just doing B7 for a day is going to be just fine. And the good thing is like that's going to give you like an extra 15% stat boosts, and it is going to allow you to actually get into B10 of all the other dungeons, which is pretty much the first stepping stone where you can actually really get going with your account. So I highly recommend it. I'm going to actually go ahead and get the second quest right here from the Summoner's Way in. We're gonna build the Lizard Man, I think. And once I do have my stable PvE core, which that's pretty much, I'd say like 85% of what I need right now, that's when we actually start building stuff that's not just, that we can also have fun with for PvP for instance, mostly not 5s and things like that. I think we're like about like 2 or 3 days away from that. If I just keep farming, we're gonna already start awakening my boy Igmanodon, I think his name is. So yeah, let's get him up and running. We're gonna evolve him. Another good recommendation I can give you guys, by the way, when it comes to evolving units is right here. I think the normal option is lowest grade, or maybe even highest grade, one of these. If you search by monster, on the top left, as you guys can see here, it automatically shows you if you have skill ups in here. And that actually also works for your regular monster storage. It pretty much works for every storage, obviously, except the enhanced storage. Here, technically, I would be able to use Devilmon, but it doesn't show up on the top left corner. By the way, I would not recommend using Devilmon on a freaking 3-star, obviously. There's like never ever the case where you should be doing that. But yeah, Igmanodon, I highly recommend building him. I think he's kind of a brain dead option. There is technically like Mystic Witches, for instance, you can go for. You don't need to 6-star him. You can keep him at 5-star and just build him like a tank. You're not going to build a speed team with him like that, but we're pretty much just getting through the first few days. Now let's just quickly look at the team comp that I would recommend for Steel Fortress. I think we're just going to get into the fight while we're at it. It pretty much consists out of this low salamander hitting first, which should apply the whole buff block thing, because the boss, every time he gets hit, puts up a shield and also armor buff. And you really want to avoid that, because you're never ever going to hit through that unless you like build a team specifically around it, and it's going to be super slow. There is a few other options, but he's kind of like the most brain dead one since it's on a passive. You really don't need to rely on his AI. It's fairly straightforward, and like I said, what I would recommend is literally just keeping every single artifact you're pulling out of this dungeon. You probably just want to climb up to maybe like B6, B7. Just give it a try, see how quick it is. I think B8 is going to be where it's like slowing down fairly massively. And then just farm that for like literally 1 day. Do that for the left side and for the right side artifacts. We're going to discuss the right side artifacts in just a second after this. Yeah, so he just got resisted right here, as you guys can see, and it's B3. I'm with like fully skilled like 6-star units, and I still struggle right now to actually kill the boss because of that shield. So just imagine how tough it gets once we're at like B5, B8, be 10 even. You're never ever gonna hit through it, especially as a beginner. So definitely you gotta bring buff block. This is B3, you should be able to one-shot it otherwise. So yeah, definitely go for that. And we got our first artifact that we farmed for. It's green, but like I said, we're just gonna keep all of them. Now let's discuss the Punisher's Crypt dungeon. It's kind of similar, except it cycles a lot harder. I think overall this is probably the tougher dungeon to get into, even though Steel Fortress is the one that's tougher to get the 100% guaranteed runs down the road. But this is gonna be like a few years from now for us. But technically it does have a lot more cycle. It hits, in my opinion, slightly harder, especially since you don't really have attribute advantage for most monsters. So you kind of gotta be like careful with that. But what I recommend is pretty much almost the same team comp, except you want to swap out the Lizard Man for, as you guys can see right now, it's an unawoken Raok in the background. I feel like probably most of you guys won't have that by the time you should be farming artifacts. But yeah, just build a Raok as well while you're at it. I think there's plenty of time for you to do all things at once. Go for some damage dealers. The reason why the Vampire Lord is so good is because he does scale extremely well with damage dealers. Pretty much he just allows your team comp to heal according to how much damage you do, which is just amazing. Not really for like the slow teams if you run like supports, but if you do run a team comp that like cycles and has a lot of burst damage, that's when like the Vampire Lord really is shining and it's gonna like do a lot of favors for you, especially with that attack buff. It just goes extremely well. Also with those two Inugamis. I think one thing that I want to do in this guide series as well is going to be discussing the runes that I'm running. Now Lapis is fairly straightforward. She's still on the farmer rune set. I'm not going to be using her for too much longer, pretty much just to level up units. She's kind of falling off in mid game fairly early. So I pretty much only am going to be using her in arena offense, for instance, for the first few days. And then just kind of like sticking with that. I think another support I want to discuss with you guys is going to be Fran. Now the thing is that in this series, we are getting Igar fairly early, like way too early compared to most beginners. So I'm kind of just debating if I should give my Fran's runes to Lauren and kind of make her my fastest and best runed violent unit, because I'm going to be using her in most of my PvE teams, at least for the start. So that's an option I can recommend. I do also think that she is one of those units you can put fight sets on. Like a slot 2 speed is kind of mandatory, which I haven't gotten so far. But again, that's going to be a matter of like 1 or 2 days. And once you have those 3 fight sets, it's kind of the same for Igar. I think those 2 units are kind of units that don't need to proc. You're going to be using them in dimensional holes. You're going to be using them in rifts. And for that, you kind of don't want to proc too much. So it's kind of nice. The more units you have on fight, the harder your units hit. It's an easy mode for PvE, to be honest. It's not going to ever carry you in PvP. But for the first few days, this is really going to give you a bunch of bang for your buck. 8%. So pretty much right here, I have 16 and plus 16. So that's like 32% extra attack. It's basically a fatal set just by having those 2 units in my team for everyone in my team. Besides that, Veramas still on the initial rune set. My Raok kind of doing the same thing. Again, as you guys can see, I'm still struggling to get the triple fight set in. It's just because even though I did get all of those plus 15 fight runes, most of them kind of suck. Like, to be honest, like especially the 2, 4, 6. A lot of them have flat stats, so they're just completely unusable. And then even then, like for instance with Bird, you definitely need like a crit slot for. So it's really hard to incorporate. Last thing I want to talk about is Devilmon usage. Now you don't need to be so hardcore, but I still want to mention it. Like I said, I did get a bunch of net 5s. I believe that the vast majority of net 5s you can kind of neglect for the first few days. And I do think that, especially for the start, if you really want to like min-max it, you're better off putting them on your 2As. Now, the thing with 2As is that you basically unlock a second tier of skill ups, which you can't really skill up with regular net 3s. You could be building other 2As and feeding those into them, but that's like a pretty big waste of energy, to be honest, and I would not recommend it. Even on my beginner account, I'm not going to do that. I would much rather build like a rune dungeon team after that and just kind of go like that. But I would highly recommend giving Devilmon to at least your farming units. So I'll be probably skilling up my Crow. You know what? We're just going to do that together right now. And once my Raok is done, we're also going to be skilling him up. Now with Crow, the thing is that in the best case scenario, you kind of don't want to get the skill up on S3. So what I'm going to do right now is this one needs 3 skill ups and this one needs 2 skill ups. So I'm going to give him 5 skill ups. In a perfect world, we don't get the 3rd skill. So there's an okay-ish chance, I guess. Oh, it's going to get the team up. So that's the thing, by the way, with team ups. Now I just counted. there's going to be one more coming up. And how it works is if you look at skill ups, once the first skill is done, it's just going to move over to the second skill. And it's never ever going to get another skill up into the first one. So right now we got unlucky. I already know it's going to be between the first skill and the third skill right now. And I 100% know that it's going to be the third skill right now coming up. So that's kind of unlucky. I mean, the chance was pretty low. I just felt like max skilling him anyways. Yeah, 3-turn branding really isn't the thing. Like, it's not that great. You're not going to ever use it. Because most things that you're going to hit, even as a beginner, are going to die before the branding actually is going to kick in the effect of 3-turn branding. But might as well. You know, it is what it is. I know Raok has maybe like another 2 or 3 skill ups. I think he needs 4, now that I think about it. So let me just quickly double check how many we have. We have 3. So we're pretty much able to max skill both of my 2As. I just wanted to like lead by example. I just wanted to tell you guys. And we can kind of go like that.